those characters that they were there, but they weren't there because no doubt there were other people in there. What was it, Hunt, the fellow that was involved in the Watergate? He was
Yeah.
seen there pretending to be a tramp, and it was a picture of Hunt. It was there. So in other words, there were a bunch of people on the ground there, and that was a theory that the actual shot came from somebody was already on the ground but later disappeared. I mean, it wasn't a one-man or four-man operation. There were a bunch of people involved, in this situation, and effectively President Kennedy was just was murdered. And there were evidently a lot of loose ends. That's why those citizens all mysteriously died. They were run over by cars, dropped dead, whatever. And and Jack Ruby himself said that the cancer that he later got, that somebody had given that to him while he was in prison.
Well, there are a lot of people who have information on different subjects on the CIA and other secret agencies. They end up dead. A lot of them.
They do indeed, and many times they end up
and cancer is one of the suspects. In other words, somebody knows how to.
Oh yeah.
A lot of people are going to be laughing about this, but it's true.
They've known how to give people cancer.
They got the way to.
Oh sure.
Start cancer.
Oh yeah, they've known how to do that since the 60s. That's a long time ago, with 50 years, and they've gotten much better methods at it now. Well, remember the FBI director of the FBI that mysteriously, supposedly went fishing in his pajama top or whatever it was there. Kobe. And they found him dead, and he'd been fishing forever in his canoe, and all of a sudden he comes up dead. So I mean, there have been a number of people, that have mysteriously, as they say, come up dead. No foul play. There wouldn't be any foul play. They said, well, the man had a heart attack. That's the other method they use, heart attacks on some people. But in that particular period we're talking about, evidently a lot of people were involved in that situation, and a lot of people saw a lot of stuff, in Dallas at the time. But LBJ, yeah, I agree with you on that he was not in the thing. That was just something people threw up there. But I think what happened with LBJ was, later in life, he heard a lot of things too. And he told Walter Cronkite in, I think, the last interview that, basically some things, that he knew, or he thought he knew, and he didn't disclose them. And then a few days later, he'd had this massive heart attack. So, that, as they say, that cured everything. Now, what do you think Bobby Kennedy heard about that, if anything?
We don't put that together very easily, other than the entire agency and the group of secret agencies and defense people disliked the Kennedys, all of them.
Okay.
And they were convinced that they were going to dismantle their little pet projects they had. So Sirhan, out there in L.A., suddenly kills Bobby Kennedy, and
supposedly
to this day he says, I believe, that he doesn't remember much about that.
He doesn't, and he was also one of these fellows that I believe I read some report. It's kind of sketchy now, but he was under the influence of some psychologist. He probably doesn't. He was probably drugged at the time. It's obvious he didn't remember it, and Johnson, one of the big ex-football players, was right around there at the time, and he wrestled him down. But some of the people thought there was more than one person. In other words, there was somebody else that fired the bullets.
Yeah,
and not him. He was just a patsy, and off he went to prison for life. So that and we know from Dr. King that the fellow that ended up in prison there in Tennessee, Ray, had nothing to do with it. I even heard a guy was in prison with him said later in life, Ray was bragging about it, but the evidence was Ray was not the man. There were a number of people in on that, even some of the people around Dr. King that had him out on the out on the little balcony or whatever it was. In fact, he was supposed to actually stay downtown at another hotel.
Yeah, Lorraine Motel's where he was.
Right.
On that little, I guess a balcony is the best way to describe it.
Yeah, it was kind of a little balcony. But what he was supposed to do was, this is where the FBI or whomever manipulated, he was supposed to have been staying at, we'll say the Hilton, one of the downtown hotels there in Memphis. And they said, well, you should go to an African-owned hotel, which, was the Lorraine, which was more of a motel than a hotel, I think. But anyway, nonetheless, he ended up there, and he, of course, ended up dead there. So, that was an open kind of a shut, I guess you'd say, a case on him. So all that stuff pretty much went together. They knocked out some of the leaders, stopped some things, and to this day, the recovery, as they say, comes very, very slowly. You're right. Most of the people now that are involved in that are dead, and the only people who would probably know anything would be people that they heard it from somebody else, or like you say, maybe a recording, or maybe a photo that never got to the police, or somebody gave it to somebody and passed it on, and eventually maybe it'll be found. We don't have even the sketchy reports that they officially did. We don't have all of that yet. Some of that stuff is sealed up.
That's true.
From the Warren Commission.
I wonder what the big secret is 50-some years later.
Yeah, everybody's dead. Virtually everybody's dead, but evidently they went back, and I think at first they were going to open that up when, the principal people all died. Then they decided to go back and extend it into more years. So it would basically mean, unless you're here to be 100, it may or may not come out. But things move much more quickly today than they do in prior years. I'll let you have the last words on this, and I want to ask you also about Ferguson, but give you the last words on JFK. I know you've done a lot of programs on JFK.
Well, JFK had magic about him that captured the imagination of the nation. And he also had the magic about him that true conservatives just could not stand the Kennedy family at all over the years. And so he had that going for him, actually. He campaigned, as many people, including Johnson, who followed him. Johnson was basically a believer of the FBI and J. Edgar Hoover, even though J. Edgar Hoover has big question marks around him and his activities on especially the Martin Luther King dead murder.
Well, now remember now, J. Edgar Hoover, when he died, his associate, we'll call him, his man friend or whatever, Tolson, also mysteriously died very quickly after him. And evidently when Tolson died, the house where they lived, a lot of stuff was taken out of it.
Yeah.
So evidently old Hoover was holding out some things, and Tolson met his too. You'd say mysterious, but he was an older man, I think in his 70s, and so was Hoover. But at the same time, he bit it in a hurry, as they say, and then they ramshackled the house, and that kind of thing. That was on Hoover. So it was one of those situations was who was watching whom. No doubt Hoover knew a lot about it, but the CIA were watching Hoover. It's kind of like the Nixon wiretaps. My opinion has always been on that, those so-called tapes, but Nixon never had those tapes. But the CIA and company put that system in, and they had most of the tapes.
Well, I didn't realize that.
That's what I suspect. But Nixon really never had. Just because most people don't understand, just because you're president doesn't mean you're running everything, including the damn White House. Because there are people working at the White House. And all kinds of people around there, the Secret Service agents, there's all kinds of, and they listen to what you're saying. And whomever is pulling their strings, you never know. I mean, it's, if you follow the $100 bills, you probably get to the end of where a lot of this stuff is going. But yeah, it's going in that direction on it, Jerry. Let me just get a couple other things, Jerry, before we get out of here. Ferguson, Missouri, outside of St. Louis, that whole area now is going to be on the martial law. The Governor Nixon has already declared that. They are waiting for a quote unquote charge to come from that grand jury, which in itself is very unusual. Usually, what they do in a shooting like that, if they take anything to a grand jury, it's just an autopsy report. Something, but usually what the DA will do is charge the person, and then they'll have or they'll take it to a preliminary as they did OJ, or they'll just charge the person and they'll then have a status hearing on it, and then just bound it over for trial, and that'll be the end of that. But they didn't do it in this case, so now they have all Missouri on tents. You and I were talking earlier out in Popular, Missouri. The people are armed to the teeth, waiting for somebody to come out there. And also the Republicans indirectly used that in the presidential campaign. They used Ebola, and that's been a big debate. Anyway, let me get you on Ferguson, and then we'll get you on this campaign.
Well, these things have been going on, seems to me, more rapidly and more often than times before. So I don't know, other than there seems to be a lot of unrest. A lot of people have issues, and better watch out in Popular, Missouri. And one thing starts another and another.
Well, it does, and a lot of this is that people have been shot in the back, or shot wherever over the years around there. So this is just not one issue of Mr. Michael Brown being shot and lying in the street for 4 hours. That was what happened at Bundy with Nicole and company there. They lied out there forever in the heat until the cops removed their bodies, which is insane. But they waited on Mr. Brown for them to get there, the coroner's office. He finally got there, and they finally, 4 hours later, removed the man's body, and he's just lying there out in the street. And that's it. So in other words, this has caused thousands, it'll be millions of dollars worth of damage. You have all these rent-a-cops coming into that area, into St. Louis. They even wanted to bring in some Chicago cops. They vetoed that situation to work at the rent-a-cops. So turn it into a police state. Republicans had pushed that. So I suppose that's where we leave Popular, Missouri. But anyway, to the election, the fall election, the Republicans are crowing about it. And it was one of the lowest turnout, actually lowest turnout we ever had, Jerry. President Obama was talking about that. Little over, about 34% of the people actually turned out to vote in that election.
We've been facing the situation of minorities electing people and saying yes or no to state questions for a long time.
Well, that's true. And just what happened out in Colorado, out there where Jane is, Cory Gardner was running against Udall. And, of course, what happened out there was they do the mail-out ballots. Everybody gets one. So the 65-year-old voted in greater numbers. They raked them all up. Thus, Udall went down to Cory Gardner. And the turnout there was a little bit more than in some places. Some places it was just dismal. About 30% of the people turned out, and that's it. So in other words, you got a 30% turnout or 40% turnout, and you get 51% of the vote. You win the election on about 20% of the people, a little over 20% of the people. They don't tell people that. And they were trying to say, Jerry, some of the latest stuff, that the money didn't influence this election. That's a lie. All these millions of dollars put in the 2014 election did influence the election, and so did ABC, NBC, and all these people and all these fake polls they had. All that stuff influenced the election in the way in which it went.
Mm-hmm. You're right.
So, you talked about that before, the influence of the money. The TV stations primarily, radio stations to less extent, not so much newspapers, they made out like bandits. In North Carolina, they spent over $1 million on a Senate campaign there. And, you can go to these various Senate campaigns. You say, well, why are all these people spending the money? And some of these characters are like in Iowa. This woman there, Ernest, who castrated the pig, incidentally, a hog.